Okay, so we're ready to cut our classic ciabatta made with poolish. We have our dough, it's ready to go. The aromas off this are fantastic. They're very floral, very sweet, very weedy. You can see there's definitely a lot of gas production, but not too much because we still need to get a little bit more fermentation on the tail end. So I have my station set up here. I have, of course, my fermented dough in a tub. I have a board with our linen all laid out, and I have a basket with some dusting flour and a sifter. Your tools may vary, but again, this is just the basics that you need to get this job done. So I'm going to start off by applying some flour. First, I'm going to dust the top of our fermented dough and then lay down a nice sheet on our work surface here. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to go ahead and do a generous amount of flour on my couche here. And I'll come back and do a little bit more as we start loading the couche. I'm going to take my dough scraper and loosen the dough from the side of the proofing container here. And what this does is really allows the flour to kind of get on the side so it has an easier time releasing from the proofing tub. So then I'm just going to transfer over and then gaze at all the beautiful fermentation we were able to achieve. And now before I do anything, I'm going to put a bit more dusting flour on here. I like to look for the shiny bits. If it's shiny, I put a little bit of flour on it just so it's sticky. If it's shiny, it's sticky. And I want to try to keep my hands and the whole work surface, everything as clean as possible. So you can see how well hydrated this dough is here. I'm going to try to gather it all in a nice rectangle. And again, I'm making 3 pieces. With normal bread, or like a shaped bread, for example, I would be cutting and scaling into precise measured pieces. But this is a very rustic bread, and I'm just going to cut it. And we're not actually going to be doing any shaping, any pre-shaping, nothing. All we're going to do is cut the dough and then transfer it over to the floured couche. So I'm just going to eyeball 3 pieces here because we're not tied to any weights and measures. A nice easy cut. And then I'm just going to lift up a little bit of a stretch, and then transfer it over to the couche. Okay? And before I move on to the next piece, I'm going to do a very, very light equalization of air. What this does, this little step is quite important because if you don't do this, you'll wind up with some very large irregular pockets, which might be an advantage, but again, we're looking for a somewhat uniform, irregular crumb structure in here. We don't want huge bubbles forming during the baking process. And this little pat right here helps eliminate that step. So once I have that one bread, the first bread down, I'll move on to the second. Again, I'll make a nice cut. Gather the dough, a little bit of a pull into this classic slipper shape. And if you'll notice, I have a little unfloured couche over here. So I'm just going to take care of that while I'm at it. Again, nice light pat on in. And then my last one. And there we go. Light equalization of the gas. So here we have our 3 cut pieces of ciabatta. Now keep in mind, I'm just doing a very traditional shape on this, which is a rectangular slipper shape. But if you were to make a smaller sandwich bread, you can cut these into much smaller squares and line them up in a couche. You can do all sorts of different shapes with these things. You can cut them into triangles if you like, or whatnot. Just let your imagination be your guide. And then once they're in the couche, I'm going to cover them just to reduce air. This is going to be very important for those of you that are up in altitude or in a drier climate. You want to keep your bread covered so they don't form a skin on the top of it. It's very important. Here, we're down closer to sea level, so and if you're closer to sea level, the humidity is going to be great enough where just a simple covering of the couche will just be a-okay. So now we're going to set this aside and let this proof for about 45 minutes, and then we'll be ready to bake.